So there are going to be three ventral stations. That means 12 pins. All right. Think about, so you got three ventrals, one lateral and one dorsal. It's 5 external. So you have 5 external stations. Go over that external list. All right. So and just start marking them off. So you're going to be responsible for the 6 cranial nerves that we said, the first 6. And so, starting, and this is all on the emblems, and you have this stuff. In fact, learn the cranial nerves by name, not by number. All right, so you have olfactory bulbs, and then identify this cranial nerve, optic nerve, right? So, and remember the deal with the optic fibers right here at the chiasm. So, specifically identify. So on the exams, I'm going to say identify these fibers. It's always going to be bundles, so it's fibers, obviously. But identify the structure could be either fibers or nucleus. So you just have to be aware of what's there. So it'll be identify the structure, identify these fibers, identify this nucleus. Are going to be those. If I want a cranial nerve, I will say identify this cranial nerve. Okay. And if I say, and what encephalon is the pin going through? I already have encephalon. All I need is mes, myo, met, I, and tau. Okay, so specifically identify, so 3-pointer, specifically identify the fibers the pin is going through, and specifically identify the fibers rostral to this pin and dorsal to, and caudal to this pin. So the pin is going through the optic chiasm, rostral is optic nerve, and then caudal is optic tract. So that's on the track side. Identify this cranial nerve. Oculomotor. Right? And the cue on this is, well, identify the structure. Cerebral peduncles. What's on the cerebral peduncles is the oculomotors. I mean, and they're big, wide, flappy. Right? So the only ones that are kind of flappy. The other ones are very delicate. This is not delicate. Right? So you got this thing on top of the cerebral peduncles, oculomotors. Identify this cranial nerve. Trochlear. Trochlear is the only one that comes from the dorsal side. Right, so it's the only one that's going to sneak out this way. I have to skip over to, I stripped the P on this for obvious reasons, but let's go to one that isn't stripped. Bada bing. And so this isn't stripped. So identify this cranial nerve. Trigeminal. All right, so the cue on the trigeminal is the pons. Go laterally on the pons. So here's the pons. Go laterally on the pons, and you'll see these things sticking up like thumbs. The widest, biggest kind of column. We know it's fragile, but they're the widest. Identify this cranial nerve. The abducens. The abducens, and the cue on that is it's at the junction of the pons and the medulla. It's on the medulla side, just off of midline. That's where you're going to have abducens. Okay. So you want this test to be challenging. You want this test to actually be hard. Because you want to be able to brag to your friends that this was a real buster. But you did great, right? So I'm not going to cause any kind of cognitive dissonance and give you some patty cake easy exam, right? So look for multiple pins. Look for the challenge. Identify. Let's go back. Yeah, let's go back. So, identify this gyrus. Lateral olfactory gyrus. Not much of a gyrus as far as gyruses go. It's not really poofy. It's not, it's not really high, but it is a gyrus. So identify this fissure. Rhinal fissure. Identify these fibers. Lateral olfactory stria. So it defines the medial side of that olfactory gyrus, and the rhinal fissure marks the lateral side of that gyrus. Identify this area. The anterior perforated substance. You can see it better here. It's like dot, dot, dot. So those are kind of the indentations. So there's the anterior perforated substance. It's just medial to the lateral olfactory stria. All right, we're good so far? Identify the structure. Mammillary body. Mammillary bodies is hypothalamus. That's one of the nuclei of the hypothalamus. All right. And so if you look at the optic chiasm mammillary bodies, in between you have this area here. If you see dark, if you see something dark and you do not see a hole, then that's the infundibulum. Right, that's the stalk that connects the pituitary to the hypothalamus. So, see dark and no hole, it's got to be infundibulum. If I say identify the structure, if we go to where is it? Yeah. So no, not that. We're ahead of ourselves on that. So if we look at, here I stripped the pia off of this, and you have all these pictures, by the way. So here's the cerebral peduncles, here's the mammillary bodies, and now between the chiasm and the mammillary bodies, you're seeing a hole. And I can't pin a hole. I mean, how do you pin a hole? So you have to say, what I'll say is, identify the space either inside or outside the brain the pin is going through. If I say a space inside the brain, you know that you're thinking ventricles or aqueduct, right? So, identify the space inside the brain the pin is going through and the tissues immediately surrounding that space. Third ventricle, and it's the median eminence. You only can say median eminence if you don't see, if you see a hole, then the infundibulum isn't there, because it would just block it out. All right, and so identify the space outside the brain the pin is going through and the encephalon that the pin is going through. That's the interpeduncular cistern. And what encephalon? The mesencephalon. Right? If we go back to Elmo. Now back to the Elmo. In terms of what you can see on the ventral side, the medulla is the myelencephalon. The pons and the cerebellum together make up the metencephalon. The cerebral peduncles is all you have is the ventral surface of the mesencephalon. I mean, we'll see this better on the sagittal. This is hypothalamus, and this is connected to the hypothalamus, so this little triangular, or this little blobby space here, is the ventral surface of the hypothalamus, so that's the diencephalon. That's the diencephalon. And then everything else is telencephalon. Right? Okay. And so I would never ask you like identify like a pons question or a medulla question. I mean, that'd be insulting. You throw stuff at it. You want the challenge, you want the bite. You want to come into this test all puffed up and saying, okay, ask me something I don't know. Ask me, come on, I dare you to ask me. You come in with that resolve, and we're fine. So, medulla, I wouldn't ask you a medulla question. Identify the structure, we said cerebral peduncles, right? Identify this structure. Pyramidal tract or pyramids. I could have said identify these fibers too. These are the fibers surfacing of the cerebral peduncles. Remember, the ventral side is motor, so it's from the brain going down to muscle. All right, and so here's the cerebral peduncles. These are cortical spinal fibers from the cortex to the spine. These are motor fibers, and so the cerebellum behind here, God bless, the cerebellum has to compare amongst all the things that it does. It compares with what you want to do with what's actually happening with the muscles, and so what you want to do has to you have to tell the cerebellum this. Right, so the fiber's going down, says, oh, I got to tell the cerebellum what we plan to do, what our intentions are, and things cross in the CNS. So it's not like these fibers are going to go to this side, these fibers are going to go to that side, these are going to go to that side. That much traffic causes the poof of the pons. So the pons is all that traffic going into cerebellum. Right, and so this is that cross traffic. We'll look at the peduncles, because the brachium pontus is the arms of the pons. We'll see that really well on the lateral side. And so it's literally brachium pontus, the brachia, the arms of the pons. You could say middle cerebellar peduncles. But why flirt with a problem? Because I don't count for spelling, but it has to be phonetically close. Cerebral peduncles and cerebellar peduncles are pretty close. You have to nail that if you're going to go that route. Just avoid it. Call it the brachioppontus. And it's more descriptive anyway, and you'll remember it better. So, identify this gyrus. Hippocampal gyrus. Identify the nucleus the pin is going through that is under the cortex. Amygdala. That's going to be a big landmark for you in terms of if you make a coronal right through there, you're going to see amygdala. And we'll cover that when we do coronals. All right, so we've got the trigeminals down. Right, so this is, I don't know why I need a close-up of the chiasm. And there's the flappy oculomotors on the cerebral peduncles. That would be a pyramid pin. So identify the structure, identify these fibers, that would be a pyramid. And that's in the myoencephalon, right? And then that would be a lateral olfactory stria pin, right? And that would be the anterior perforated substance pin. Okay, so let's see. What do we have here that we didn't have before? Not much more except for the trigeminal. Oh my gosh, we just did 3 stations. 3 stations down. Did I forget anything? That's 3 stations, all right? So let's march. So we'll also look at lateral view. So there'll be 1 lateral station. So look at the lateral, the notion that we have for lateral, and ask yourself, what could he possibly ask? I don't like that one. Let's go to this one. So here on this lateral one, what could he ask? Okay, so identify these fibers. Trigeminal. Here's the pons, and there's the trigeminal. You can't see the brachium pontus if you have big trigeminals, because it'll cover it up. You have to retract the trigeminals to see the brachium pontus. And so on this one, you just have a stump. You don't have that big one. These are the fibers of the brachium pontus. So identify this cranial nerve, trochlear, right? Identify this fissure. Identify this fissure. Rhinal fissure. That rhinal fissure goes all the way from here to here. So I can pin it anywhere along there. Also, don't exercise bad studentship. I can and will ask the same question in another station. So don't think, oh, he asked that already, he's not going to ask it again. Sure he will. Right? So this rhinal fissure could be here, 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 or even there. Identify the structure. The insula. Very good. Identify the sulcus. There's the sylvian sulcus. Once you see insula, follow it straight up and you see the sylvian sulcus. And the sylvian sulcus is not continuous with the cruciate. All right, so don't think that, please. Hippocampal gyrus, amygdala pin. Not much more I can add to this. Oh, identify this dark, tufty stuff. Choroid plexus. This is what you're going to see. That's as far caudal as you're going to see choroid plexus sticking out of the cerebellum. Identify the space outside the brain the pin is going through. Cisterna magna. Once I say identify the space outside the brain, you're taking cisterns. You only have 3 that you're responsible for. So this way it would be cisterna magna. Identify the space outside the brain the pin is going through. Superior cistern. I probably have to anchor it on the colliculus. We'll get to that in a second. And so it could be identify the space outside the brain the pin is going through, and the nucleus just underneath. If you have a clean shot at it, right? And feel free to ask questions as we go through this. I'm just going to power. another station. Got 4 stations now.
Can you go over the insula and the Soviet sulcus one more time?
Sure. The key on the insula, it looks as if you just pushed it in. And we know, we went over the selection pressure was to have more parietal cortex, more temporal cortex. And as that developed, it kind of pushed that in, right? Sheep are showing that kind of selection pressure, but they just don't have the cortex yet. And so it's the beginnings of it. This is pushed in. As this develops, it's going to overgrow this thing. As this develops, it's going to overgrow this. And I'll show you that in a little bit. So the insula would be just over the tip of the hippocampal gyrus on the other side of the minor fissure, right there. And it looks as if it's pushed in. So take a look on the other lateral view. There's the insula. And there's the Sylvian sulcus, going straight up from the insula. Good? And look at here, you got a better shot at that brachium pontus. It looks as if it's going in there. All right, so brachium pontus, just rostral to the stump of the trigeminal, and a brachium pontus here. And here's another shot at that choroid plexus, coming out right in the middle of the cerebellum. All right, so that's 4 stations. We got 3 ventrals and a lateral. Should we move to dorsal? You good on this? So if we go to dorsal, and here's a shot at looking down on the brain. Here's cerebellum and the end of the cerebrum. That membrane is covering up the superior system. That's defining the end of the superior system. If I go to a dorsal view and I take off the cerebellum, all right, look at what we have so far. So on this dorsal view, taking off the cerebellum, identify this nucleus. Superior colliculus, identify. Inferior colliculus, it's off, it's not a midline structure, it's off to the side. Identify this structure. Pineal body. Remember on your sagittal, it's habenula, pineal, and then colliculus, right? And so there's pineal. Identify this structure, the obex, just as that 4th ventricle opens. And so this is the space of the 4th ventricle. So we're good so far? So the obex marks the beginning of the 4th ventricle. What marks the end of the 4th ventricle? Anterior medullary velum. That anterior medullary velum is the flap that marks the end of the 4th and the beginning of the aqueduct. Right, so it goes from here to that aqueduct. You can't see the anterior medullary velum from a dorsal view. It's got to be a sagittal view. Okay. Wait. Just add. Nope, not that one. This one. So here's a shot taking off the cerebellum, superior colliculi, inferior colliculi to the bottom and off to the side smaller. Right. I think I have another one too. Here's another one where you can see obex down here, the trough of the 4th ventricle. You see that? So the trough of the 4th ventricle. Here's the collection of peduncles, all 3 of them connecting the cerebellum that would have been here. Superiors and inferiors on either side. Okay, so what's left on the dorsal is the rostral part of the dorsal, and for that, we'll go to Tim. Talk to me, Timmy. So, parallel, roughly parallel to the midline, identify this sulcus. Superior frontal sulcus. How about this one? So identify 3-parter, right? No, 2-parter. Identify this fissure and identify the lobe caudal to it. So what fissure is it? Cruciate fissure. And what's the lobe caudal to it? Caudal means towards the tail. The parietal lobe. So this marks frontal and parietal lobes. So I can go either way on that. I can go three-pointer, which isn't useful.
Can you see the Sylvian sulcus from on the design?
Not without more cues. The cue on the Sylvian is going to be the insula, and we can't see the insula.
So would that be more of a question for like the lateral?
Absolutely. You can only see the insula from a lateral view.
Okay.
Oh, identify. Identify this, specifically identify the structure. The vermis. If I didn't say specifically, I'd have to take cerebellum. So I want more than just cerebellum. The vermis is that center portion with the buttons on either side. So there's that center portion. Vermis. You good? Oh crap, we just did all 5 externals.
So you would say specifically to identify the vermis?
Yeah, I would. If I say specifically identify the structure, I won't take cerebellum because that's kind of general.
Yeah.
I want vermis. You see specific, and then that's a key qualifier. Okay. We're good?
Can we say coronal sulcus instead of
Superior frontal. Say superior frontal, like wrong. And you know you're flirting with a minus point if you call that the ANSI. Call it the rhino, the cruciate fissure. Not many buttons, but that's one. Okay, so we just did all the externals. Any questions on externals? So that's 5 stations. That's a third of the test. So let's go sagittal. Sagittal, you're going to have